All right, welcome everyone. We'll get started just a little bit after 2. So today we're going to be talking about embedding the principles of universal design into remote instruction. So this session is being brought to you by the Centre for Innovation in Teaching and Learning and the Blundon Centre. And to begin, we would like to acknowledge that the lands on which Memorial University's campuses are situated are in the traditional territories of diverse indigenous groups. And we acknowledge with respect the diverse histories and cultures of Beothuk, Mi'kmaq, Innu, and Inuit of this province. All right. So as we begin, it'd be great if all the participants could keep their mics muted unless they have something that they want to ask or say. Also, if you could turn off your camera, so basically stop sharing your video, it would just help because of bandwidth. And if you're having difficulties with this, you might want to also close down your computer application so that you increase your bandwidth. All right. So my name is Keith Power, and I'm one of your hosts for today. So I'm an educational developer and teaching consultant with CITL. Also been a per course instructor with the Faculty of Education. And with me today is Pam Phillips. She's a senior instructional designer with CITL and also a per course instructor. Jason Geary is the manager of the Blundon Centre and a per course instructor as well. And Stacy Alexander is an assistant instructional designer with CITL. So our presentation today, what we'd like to do is just go over a brief overview of UDL, why we should be thinking about UDL and using UDL principles in our teaching and learning. And then we're going to provide some strategies and examples of incorporating UDL. And last but not least, we'll look at some resources to assist with course planning. All right. So our goal for today is to identify and discuss ways that UDL can help you optimize learning for all students in your course. So before we begin and move into the actual aspects of UDL, I'd like the participants to take just a minute or so, and in the side chat box, if you'd be able to type in a few activities that you typically use in your course. So, think of 1 or 2 things that you typically do and put those in the side chat and share. And we'll come back to that later on in the presentation. All right. So universal design for learning, the basic premise of universal design for learning is looking at multiple ways of teaching and multiple ways of representing the material and curriculum that you're covering, and also providing multiple ways of action and expression for students. So if I was to look at multiple ways of engagement, for example, one way that you can provide you can provide your students with choice, and this would enhance their sense of autonomy within a class. So for example, you could give them a choice between doing a presentation or doing a written assignment, or you might give them a choice between doing 2 or 3 small quizzes versus 1 larger exam. I do remember, for example, when I was a student, a bachelor student a long time ago, that was one of the things that one of my professors did. He gave us a choice between a bunch of quizzes that we could do, or we could put those quizzes into 1 larger exam that we could do at the end of the semester. But that was an important piece for a lot of students to make that choice. It also is important to make the material relevant and authentic. So just to give you an example here, when I was doing some of my own research in a high school, there was a student from refugee background, and she was in a Newfoundland culture course. And the activities that they had to do was they had to design a traditional Newfoundland fishing shack that would be, on the located down by the water, and the students had to build a model of that. And of course, she'd only been here in the province for a few months and didn't really have any background knowledge about that, those types of shacks or traditional homes. So what the teacher allowed her to do was actually build a model of a home from her home country. She was from a country in Africa. And what that allowed her to do is then actually be a part of that class and be engaged with the other students, and access her prior knowledge. So while she wasn't doing the exact same activity, she was doing something similar, but then again, it actually, like I said, it allowed her to participate, within that class and share her knowledge with the other students, which is an important piece. So if you can change things up for some students, that's an important piece. When we look at multiple ways of representation, one of the things that we think about there is, presenting material in multiple ways. So you would actually have videos, you would actually have pictures, but if you have a picture, you might want to also have a description, a written description of that picture, for example. So you're allowing students to access the material in many ways. And then the last one is, for them to be able, their action and expression. So students learn in different ways and they can express themselves in different ways. And going back to the example I gave just a minute ago, some students might excel at doing written exams, whereas some other students might excel if they're given the opportunity to do a presentation. So if you're only doing written exams or you're only doing presentations, some students are at a disadvantage. But if you actually provide a variety of these opportunities, it kind of makes it more of a fair playing field for students. So this is just something else to keep in mind. I'm not going to talk too much about these because Jason's actually going to cover a little bit more of these later on and give more examples. And so next, I'd like to talk a little bit about UDL principles. One of the key priorities. One of the key priorities is teaching to the margins. So when we think about the margins, we think about people that may not be your typical or traditional student. They may have some special kind of need or requirement for learning. And just to give you an example, if you have a student who is colorblind, you might have to think about the presentation that you're providing. So the background and the contrast between what's on the screen is important for somebody that has color blindness. So just thinking about those things, which is actually number 3, proactively, if you go ahead and think about some of these things before you actually design your course, and implement these principles in, it helps all learners. Going back to the second one, creating expert learners. One of the things that we try and do for students is to create students who are motivated and engaged, and they are taking the lead in their own learning. And going back to a sense of choice again, if you provide students with a sense of choice, you allow them to actually then take ownership of their the learning that they're going through. And it creates an expert learner. So they actually become the expert on the areas that they focus on. Another priority is enabling access. So if you look at learners, we want to look at how they interface with knowledge and how it is expressed. So again, providing multiple ways of accessing the required curriculum is important to consider. Also, providing flexibility and getting to learning outcomes. Again, we're going back to saying that students can express their learning in multiple ways. They could produce a video, they could create a drawing, they could actually, they could write an article. So there's many different ways that they can show their learning, and giving them, again, an opportunity to express their learning in multiple ways is an important aspect. Explicitly addressing expectations and structures. So this goes into the beginning when you actually should go into the rubric, into your syllabus and your rubric, where you explicitly tell students what is expected from them from a different assignment or what is expected from them through the course. so that it's clear and that they understand what they have to do to succeed. And the last priority here is that you use frequent and varied assessment. And I've talked about this many times, but it's better to have multiple small assessments rather than one or two large assessments. So one of the key principles of UDL is that a person with a disability can acquire the same information, engage in the same interactions, enjoy the same services in an equally effective, equally integrated manner, and with substantially equivalent ease of use as a person without a disability. So you have to consider that all students have the capability of learning when they're given the supports that they need to learn. Additionally, on the bottom, it's important to note that when you provide all these additional supports, it doesn't just benefit the learners that need those supports, it benefits all students. So that's a key thing to keep in mind as you plan your courses. All right, I'm going to pass it on over to Jason now, and he's going to take it from here.
Thanks, Keith. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks again. So I want to introduce just a couple of, I know it's a short webinar today, but just wanted to introduce a couple of themes or topics that I think will be helpful as you consider using UDL or some other universal design approach when designing and delivering your courses. And so this idea, I think, is a really neat one. It's the idea of the mythical middle or the average learner. And so, you don't have to dig too deep into the UDL literature to come across this, a reference to the mythical middle. And what the literature challenges us to do is when we're thinking about our courses, when we're designing our courses, to avoid designing for what we think would be an average learner, because no average learner exists. And so when we begin our courses, we often look at, what textbook are we going to use? Are we going to have a midterm and a final, right? And so we think about what's the average student going to do in this course? And if we don't stretch our thinking and think beyond simply a textbook or simply exams, then we're disadvantaged. As Keith said, not simply students with disabilities, but we're actually likely not designing our courses for anybody. And one of my favorite authors, Todd Rose, writes in the field of the science of the individual. And he talks about when we design for the average, and not just us in higher education, but when anyone's design, when we design for the average, we actually design for nobody, because nobody's average. And so, applicable to us in higher ed, if we look at, kind of the learning preferences, not learning styles, but learning preferences or strengths of our students, if we look at a profile of a student, we'll likely see a jagged, in this research, we see these jagged profiles. And so students are great at this, but not so great at this, and they're wonderful at this and not so great at this. And so when we see those, when we work through those profiles, what we realize is that whether it's, Todd talks about fighter jet, the fighter jet pilots and how they design cockpits for the average fighter jet pilot, and when they went to fit into the cockpit, no one actually fit in there. And again, Todd moves to talk about how we're doing this in higher ed. So my point here is to think about when we're sitting down to design or deliver a course, who are we designing for? Keith, the next slide, please. Keep going. Thank you. And this is the question that I pose to myself when I'm designing or delivering a course, and also to my colleagues and to you all, is that shouldn't we be able to teach every student so that each of them can learn? So if we have students that are phenomenal test takers, they'll likely do very well if I design a course with a couple of midterms or a final. If I have students that enjoy group work, then if I rely heavily on group work, they'll do really well. But maybe not those students that are more introverted or prefer to do solitary research. And so that's what I like to reflect on is there a way that we can design our courses so that there are jumping off points or points of contact that most or all or most students can grab onto? Not that we're going to be able to design a personalized experience for students, but as Keith highlighted, in most universal design approaches, it designs with choice in mind. So it allows students to leverage their strengths and to capitalize on what those strengths are, and at the same time, pushing them to maybe enhance those areas that they're not so strong in. Next slide, Keith. So I just want to take a couple of minutes to talk about where universal design or UDL falls in relation to accommodations. And those are formal accommodations that students with disabilities are often afforded in our classes. And as Keith mentioned, universal design, UDL, UID, is not just about reaching students with disabilities. It started there. It certainly started there in the early 90s with research on students who were actually in a hospital setting. But it's evolved and it's emerged, and now in higher ed, it really looks at making sure that courses, syllabi, materials that we design, videos, we're making sure that these are accessible by a large number of students. And again, we know from universal design research that we can do this and that students can benefit, and it's not just students with disabilities. With regards to accommodations, the goal with any universal design approach is not to eliminate the need for accommodations, specific accommodations for students with disabilities. That may end up being the result, but that's not the goal. And so I would caution as we move forward and encourage you to explore universal design for learning or any of the wonderful models that are out there, but don't do so with the goal of eliminating the need for accommodations. I'll share just from my teaching a number of years back when I started my journey as a UDL practitioner. I did look at how I can have multiple ways, multiple means of students to express their knowledge. And I did so. I still had a test. I still actually had 2 tests in my course, the one particular course that I really focused on. And I did have a student who approached me at the midterm and said, I typically write my exams in the Blundon Centre or the Accessibility Service Office. But however you approached it this semester, or however you've designed this course, I don't think that I need to do that. And so I'm just wondering if it's okay if I write my midterm in the classroom with everybody else. And of course, that was no problem with me, whatever the student felt comfortable with. But not every student is going to have that experience. So as you begin, or hopefully you begin your journey with universal design, know that you may have an impact on accommodations, and you may be required to offer less accommodations, but those accommodations are still offered to students, and we encourage students to use them whenever they feel they're required. The end result may be, however, that they rely less and less on those prescribed accommodations based on how you design your courses. The other concept I wanted to introduce, and again, just reading an article this morning about the importance of neurodiversity in higher education. And neurodiversity essentially is how we all think and learn, and knowing that each student is going to be different. And not only is each student going to be different, students are going to be different on different days. And just think about us as instructors or professionals. Are we the same in a meeting on Monday morning as we are on Friday afternoon? Our motivations may be different. Our ability to sustain attention may be different. And so to think about this concept of neurodiversity when we're looking at designing our courses and offering our courses, and to really understand that students are going to bring different strengths, different challenges, and even those same students will bring different strengths or different challenges, as the semester goes on or as the week goes on, and so encouraging us to think about that. And then just to reiterate what Keith said about teaching to the margins, and I've had a number of conversations over the last couple of weeks talking about some of the approaches to designing in a universal design method or way is having incredible impact on English language learners. So things that we would think about accommodating, not capital A accommodations, but small a accommodations, thinking about how we can make our courses more accessible. We're actually having an incredible impact on students whose who English might be their third or fourth language. And so we're finding some of the design approaches are having a positive impact on those students as well. So there are a number of, as Keith talks about the margins, there are a number of students in the margins, and we know they're increasing. So these students who are English language learners, students who have children, we know a number of students who are struggling now to find the space and the time to carve out at home while they're learning remotely. And so some of these design principles can help. Next one, Keith. So this is a long list. I won't go through all of these, but I just wanted to give you a couple of examples of what I've been able to do, in my journey as a UDL practitioner, and to kind of couch these approaches under the three principles. Again, providing multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation, and multiple means of action and expression. One thing I will caution is that when you read through the literature, the UDL literature, or any of the other models for universal design, they encourage us to go slow. Start small, go slow. And for whatever reason, when I embarked on my journey, I didn't start small, and I didn't go slow. And I likely did too much at one time, but I learned from that. But I just wanted to highlight some of the things that I was able to leverage as an instructor to try and capitalize on this on the UDL principles. So one of the things I did was to use learner inventories, and these weren't formal, kind of learning profiles or inventories, any of the commercially available inventories. It was simply a page and a half of questions that I wanted to know about them as learners. So Keith talked about one of the goals of UDL is to enhance, create expert learners. And so I took a page and a half to get students to think about and articulate their experience as a learner. And those answers that I got on those inquiries were incredibly helpful. They helped me learn about each of those individual students. Helped me design. I'm getting some feedback. Keith, can you see if there's any microphones open? I also got some great feedback in helping me design some of the projects for that course. Some of the other things that I've used and that are used to engage students in a course. Again, using the LMS, and I know a lot of us are leveraging Brightspace now, likely more than ever. I've used social media to engage learners for those that were comfortable with it. Prior to COVID-19, I was using Skype or some kind of virtual office hours to chat with students who may not be able to get to campus to meet with me. And I had one student who reached out specifically to say what a great opportunity it was. He was a principal in a school in rural Labrador, northern Labrador, and just was so busy and had two kids at home, and so we were able to Skype late into the evening to answer any of his questions, and he actually interviewed me as one of his project. Mid-semester evaluation, so giving students an opportunity to give feedback very informally on teaching. So just saying thumbs up, thumbs down, anonymous ways to do that. Another thing I've leveraged is peer review. So getting students to partner up and just have each other read or review their submissions prior to when I would get it. And I found some wonderful value in that. For me as an instructor, I didn't have to worry about a lot of the grammar or spelling mistakes that I would find if I was just getting the final draft without that peer review. The use of rubrics, and Keith mentioned that as well, video and audio feedback, and Brightspace is getting even better at this to provide that audio and video feedback for those of you that have tried that. Scaffolding assignments. And so, one of the things I like to do if I have a larger assignment in a course is to indicate mile markers or milestones so that students are kind of ushered along through the process of creating whatever it is that they decide to create, whether it's a paper or a podcast or write a children's book. They know that there are going to be mile markers along the way, and to help them sometimes help them meet the deadline. And so I've gotten feedback from students that they really like that. And a final thing is student response systems. So some of those clicker systems that we use just to allow students to be engaged, feel heard in the classroom, and to generate some discussion. Okay, so if we move to multiple means of representation, so ways that I was able to present material to students. So of course we have lectures, the use of slides or videos, role plays, and another one that I like, debates, considering open educational resources. So again, if we go back to the idea of the mythical average student, we assume that they'll be able to digest a textbook from beginning to end, or purchase or afford a textbook. And so if there are opportunities to incorporate some more open materials, consider websites, podcasts, consider incorporating that into the content for your particular course. Providing lists of key concept or skeleton notes. I know some folks do that. Study guides, allowing students to create study guides and then submit that, and I'll use their questions on their tests. Small and large group discussions. Also, when presenting material, just making sure that if it is a Word document or a PDF, that it's accessible. Excuse me. And then distributing slides before class, so that students have the ability to breeze through them. Or I've done it so that I've used Google Slides and allowed them to follow along on their devices during class as well. And then finally, if we just move to action expression real quick. Some ways that I've been able to tap into different ways of students displaying what they know. So thinking about maybe a menu style approach. So instead of just relying on tests and exams, maybe having a test or an exam, allowing for a paper, or make it even wide open. Think about, don't tell students what they have to create, but what you want that project to entail. And so it could be a podcast. It could be, I've had students create documentaries without telling them to create a video. That was something that they wanted to leverage. So thinking about how students can demonstrate that, or even allow them to choose what it is and how they demonstrate it. Group work, flexibility in assessment formats, using, of course, a mix of individual and group assignments so that we don't necessarily privilege one over the other. Encouraging the use of technology. So, you know, there's a number of, really neat, and we're leveraging it more and more during COVID-19, these collaborative technologies allow students to, in real time, collaborate and develop some really neat things. And then again, peer evaluation. So making there a formal structure and allowing students to evaluate their peers is, you know, I've done that myself, and it's had a wonderful impact on learning. So I'll leave it there and hand it over to Pam.
Okay, I think, thank you, Jason. Before we get started, just going over resources, there may be a couple questions. I think Carolyn has a question. So Jason, just wondering if you got any suggestions for Carolyn. Carolyn, did you want to repeat your question, or we can take it from the
I see it here.
Chat box? Yep.
Yep. So Carolyn's asking, is this where we can provide students with choice? If they prefer larger assessments, you can offer this option. Yeah, so again, it's going to be up to you with what fits with your particular course, maybe your discipline, and maybe one of the things that could be an option is, you know, having the same types of assessments, but allowing students to pick the weight for that particular assignment. And so, you know, if you have a paper, a large paper, for example, you could allow students to have a sliding scale of what they would like that paper to be graded. So it could be, do you want it to be worth 15% or 25%? Certainly, you wouldn't make it 0 or 100, but give them a scale to pick what they would feel more comfortable with that particular assignment. Or an exam, how much do they want the exam to be worth, and give them kind of a sliding scale. This is something that I think will differ from program to program, and maybe discipline to discipline, with regards to what's possible. But I know I've used that as an instructor, and I've also experienced it as a student in my doctoral program. And it really makes you to commit, understand what your strengths are as a student, and commit. And so at the beginning of the semester, in the first 2 weeks, I have to identify that my final is going to be worth 25%, and my final paper is going to be worth 40%. And so I really need to know and feel strongly that my ability to write a strong paper supersedes my ability to write a final exam. So again, depending on the level, this may not be something, Carolyn, that you let first year students or second year students decide, but maybe you do.
Jason, if I could jump in, please. Actually, you were reading my response to Carolyn's question. Carolyn's question was that she has experience where some students that typically use the Blundon Centre, they would rather have like larger midterms or finals rather than multiple quizzes, because they don't want to, go through the process of setting up the accommodations. But I'd also like to address that. So my answer was that, you can provide students with a choice. And if I can go back to the example I used of, it was my human physiology professor. So it was during that course, the way he structured it, he offered 5 quizzes throughout this semester, and then he had an exam at the end. So those quizzes were typically worth 10 to 15% each. And then the exam, I can't remember exactly, I think it was 30%. But I had a choice whether I wanted to do any of those quizzes. I could skip one quiz and do the next one. Once I got a grade back, if I got 70 and wasn't happy with that, I could drop the grade. And those marks then got added on to the final exam. Some people in the course wrote final exams worth 100%. Some wrote final exams worth 30%. It was all depending on the student. They had a choice going through the course. So if they, like I said, if they didn't do well on a quiz, they had the choice of dropping that quiz, but knowing that they had to do better in the final. So there are ways of giving opportunities to students to take control of, how they are assessed. And basically that gives them the power then, to understand. So if they realize, like, I don't like these little quizzes, they can go ahead and do just one big final exam. That's their choice. Does that help at all? Yes.
Yeah, my apologies about that. There are students who still prefer to write 100% final. I've heard from a number of students who want to write 100% final because it gives them the entire semester to digest. These are students with learning disabilities. It would give them the entire semester to digest the material, so they could read the textbook 3, 4, 5 times if they needed to. And obviously we discourage, I think the university discourages 100% finals, but yeah.
Okay, does anybody else have any questions or comments that you'd like to ask at this point?
All right, Pam, I'll put up the PowerPoint again.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I'm just going to basically walk you through some of the resources that we put together to help you with course planning. So I'll turn off my video camera and then walk you through some. So I'll share my application screen. Okay, can everybody see this? The part 1, planning your course. If you can, just let me know in the chat. Okay, thank you, Stacy. Okay, so the first one is a guide on CITL's website for preparing your course for remote or online learning. It includes many of the tips and strategies and resources that Jason just discussed and Keith. So some of them here, so this is a collapsible here. So we look at the assessment one. So we've got the links out to types of assessments and UDL principles and assessments. So if you go to this website, it talks to us about types of assessments, like assessing students' performance with respect to job preparation, prerequisites, and university or college program goals. So it gives us some things here to consider, and a video on multiple means of representation, and so some other examples as well. Then we've got if you look at the other one here, so can people still see my screen here? I'm wondering if you can still see my screen. Yeah, okay, good.
This is Jason. I'm just seeing Keith's slide, so I didn't know if anyone else was having issues.
Okay, so maybe I didn't see that. Let's see. Let's share it again. Okay. Okay, I think you can see it again. Correct? Okay.
Nope.
No? Okay, let's see what's happening.
We got it.
Okay, perfect. Good. Okay, and so then we're walking down through also as well. We talked a lot about peer assessments. So we've got some tips here and examples on peer assessments and assignments that we found. And we talked about rubrics as well. And also some of the other tools that we talked about for Peer Scholar, for example. That's a tool that we have that's supported at the university for peer assessments, and along with the assignment, video assignment tools. So we've got some of this information here. And if you want to know more information, dig a little bit deeper, we provided some links here as well. And under the as well, under the section on selecting and learning activities and resources, we have like examples there of formative classroom assessment techniques that Keith talked about earlier. So having a little smaller, check your understanding exercises or activities throughout the course. And then also we talked about the looking at using other like audio clips and record your own. So we provided some examples to like the Microsoft Voice Recorder and Audacity we use quite a bit as well. Then if we look at the part 2 of this site, this check guide, we also have, so if you're starting your course from scratch, so you've never used Brightspace before, and you want to begin putting some content into Brightspace, we have a course setup kit that contains a template with pages that are already formatted for accessibility standards and can be easily edited in HTML within the site itself. So you can download that kit or request it to be uploaded. Just go to our CITL support center and they will assist in uploading that course setup kit into your Brightspace course site. And again, there is some pages in there too as well for students on you know, learning how to use the Brightspace shell, and also helpful resources. We found, you know, a lot of the resources like the Blundon Centre, the Writing Centre, so we've added those pages for you. And then you can delete any pages that you don't want, or you can edit pages as well. Also, we put in a sample schedule that students can see in the course, you know, week by week, what you're covering in your course. Also, I found this other website here, and I have linked in appropriate sections within the guide, but this website is been created for its UDL on campus for higher education, and it provides a number of resources here for planning and designing your curriculum with bearability in mind, media materials and accessibility and policies. So there's lots of really good examples here. So we talked about video earlier, And we have resources here and examples of types of videos that you can include, and transcripts, and creating or having captioning turned on. So some ideas here as well. And students, and the big goal here is having students create their own videos. As Jason talked about, a lot of the assignments, sometimes we ask students to do research papers. So giving students the option to present in any format. So it could be video or audio as well. And the neat one here I found as well is writing your learning goals. So we talk about learning outcomes, and they've given some examples here. So one was to, so if you said here, the following sample curricular goal is articulated as write a paragraph about how the circulatory system works. Well, then they showed us here how you, so writing a paragraph has additional tasks laid over the mastery of the content. So trying to get us to think about how to write that more clearly. So from a UDL perspective. So they give some examples throughout as well. And also some things that we talk about a lot when we're working with faculty for on-campus, remote, or online courses, fully online courses, is your syllabus. So it gives examples of syllabus and components for remote instruction that you would be nice to add, like a video, an introductory video. And also a screencast video. I've chatted with a lot of faculty that are using that to walk students through the design of their course, so that where to find information. And they can do a simple casting video just even using PowerPoint, and it can be saved as a separate file that they can upload in their course. So here's some examples, and then also other things to consider that the UDL, like often the accommodations are placed at the end of the syllabus. So moving that up forward, like the accommodations that you will want to make, students with, like here, they give some examples. So your office hours and then accommodation statement. Same thing with course descriptions, including that, and then they get into objectives as well. So I thought some of that was very interesting. And also finding material. So Jason talked about using open educational resources and free content that's out on the internet. And we all know about YouTube videos and finding these videos that have captions and subtitles included. So searching for some information that you like or images. So if they've got a collection here on their website, where you can scroll down and find some things. I usually go right down to the bottom for the one on Wikimedia Commons. It has a number of images that I like as well, and Flickr. So these are free or open source that you can use. And they also have a search guide here that some of you might be familiar with to help you refine your search to get better results of what you're looking for. And then lastly, or finally, just a reminder that resources from Memorial's library, you can also put on, well, I always say the old term e-reserves, but we normally call them course resources that can be put on at the library. Will assist with that. You can give them your syllabus and all of your readings and chapters, readings, and any videos that you may have found on their site or elsewhere, and they will help create an e-reserve for you that students and yourself can actually easily find or link to in Brightspace. So students can go to the library's website or in the course shell itself and find these readings and resources. So that's a few of the resources that we found. So maybe you can share other resources that you might avail of. So I'm going to stop sharing here now and turn it back to the group. Thanks, Stacy, for sharing the resources, the URLs as well. Okay, Keith, over to you.
Yes. So yeah, so we'll, just give me 1 second here. There we go. So we're coming towards the end of the presentation, but just a few questions for you to think about related to this presentation. So if you could answer in the side chat what you think, whether this question is true or false or a statement. UDL means that all curriculum has to be overhauled and redesigned. If you want to, you can answer over in the side. False, not all. All right. So when you think of UDL, and Jason alluded to this earlier, where he felt he tried to do too much at one time. If you're interested in implementing UDL in your courses, the best way to do it is in baby steps. So we would suggest, start by offering 2 alternatives expression, so you can, make a choice of how students actually, complete an assignment. So you would just start with something small. Ask your students about their preferences and offer choice. That's something else that you could do. And be willing to try new ideas and get feedback from your students. So even if you try something, ask them after if they enjoyed having the opportunity of choice, for example. So again, when we think about UDL, I like to think of the +1 principle, and that is where instructors implement one new thing and they test it out, get some feedback, and then after that, they can actually go ahead and try another thing. And as they do that, they're building their course and making them more accessible over time. So please don't feel that you have to do everything all at once. The next question. UDL only benefits the students. So I'm wondering what people feel about this question. Is it true or, statement, true or false? All right. Well, it seems like everybody's on the same track. So actually, instructors report more enjoyment when they implement UDL. One of the things that is more enjoyable is the fact that there's less repetition in assignments. So you're going to get a variety of different assignments coming in. You're going to get to see students' creativity. And again, as an instructor, you're probably going to learn some things from your students because of that variety. You also are going to, instructors always want their students to be engaged and motivated. So when you implement UDL, that's something that typically happens. You'll see students become more engaged in their classes. And you'll also see that the teaching and learning becomes more creative. So again, it's not the same thing that's happening, semester after semester, you get to see the same thing. I remember actually, we were talking about labs, and one of the things that they do in biology is they get students to go out and actually find a specimen and take pictures of the specimen. And so in Newfoundland, they're always getting earthworms, they're getting the same things. But now that we're teaching remotely, we've got students that are over in China, we have students in Iran, we have students all around the world. So the actual instructors are very excited to see what kind of specimens they're going to have as used as part of this lab. So it provides a little bit more variety. And the next greatest thing is students take more ownership of the learning. So it takes the burden off the teachers to say, and the instructors to say, I'm responsible for how the students perform. The actual students do end up taking more ownership of their learning. So next, I'm going to ask you to think back to the beginning of this session when I asked you to write in a couple of activities in the side chat that you typically do in your class. And now, considering this session and the things that we talked about, what are some ways that you could alter one of those activities to make it more inclusive or more accessible for students? And please feel free to share those in the side chat. And I'm going to stop sharing here now. Let me see. And just before we come to an end, this is our contact information. This presentation is going to be sent out to all the participants today anyway, so you don't have to copy this down. So we'll be sending this out to you. But if you do have any questions about UDL, please feel free to contact myself or Pam or Jason. All right, I'm going to open up the chat here and take a peek and see what people are saying.
Carolyn just had a question there for me about the learning inventory. Yeah, Carolyn, I can send me an email and I can send you. Again, this isn't a this wasn't a commercially available one. It's just questions that I thought were important for me to understand and to get a starting point for where the students were, and then it also helped me pick the groups because I asked students in that inventory, do you like, you know, your leadership preference? Do you want to be a leader, or would you prefer to be led by a strong leader? And it led to some really amazing work. So I can share that with you.
Jason, do you think you would be able to make a comment about Erica's question where she asks, in terms of accessibility, is there an issue with having some resources in a separate site other than D2L so that both sites have to be reachable by the student?
Yeah, so, you know, I rely on external websites all the time. I mean, there's a way, of course, that we can, if you know in advance, or there's a way to kind of make them populate inside the Brightspace environment. But I don't see a problem with having outside resources. Erica, are you thinking about like a course website outside of D2L or something else? I mean, if it's a website or some other resource, yeah.
Think about the library. So to have yet another website for students to go to where stuff is collected.
Yeah. So are you thinking specifically like some of the content guides that they have?
Oh no, I think Pam has answered my question. She said the
Okay.
e-reserve at the library is embedded within the Brightspace, so it's part of that whole package then. Okay.
It is.
Yes, it
Yeah.
is. Yeah, and the other thing is that in the past, Erica, we would try to, in Brightspace, link to the specific article, and we would have number of links throughout. So now we have one link that you would embed, and students will be able to find it there. And also, the library can help students that need accommodations to make sure they get like if they need a version printed in a larger format, they can give them some
Perfect.
ideas where to go
Okay.
for that sort of thing if they're on
Right.
campus, and if not, then maybe some technology that they can use as well.
Perfect. Thanks, Pam.
One thing too, Erica, I was helping a faculty person this morning, and the library had set up her e-reserve for her course resources, and she said she could be able to see it in her course, and we didn't, so we weren't able to see it. So then I'll post a link now that shows you how to make the link, because it is embedded, it's connected, as we said, within Brightspace, but you have to add the link in Brightspace. And I think, Stacy, you might be able to add the URL. If not, I can find it fairly quickly too. So I'll add that in the text chat so that you can actually see it in your course, Brightspace course site when it's done at the library.
Oh, excellent. Thanks. Now for the text chat, is there a way to save that chat text in WebEx? I'm not finding the right place.
That's a good question. I believe I will have access to all of the chat and as the host, so I can send that along afterwards. Like I said, we're going to be sending out the PowerPoint presentation to everybody anyway, and this video will also be posted on our website, so CITL's website, so you'll have access to it there as well, but I'll make sure that I get the chat and make a copy of it for anybody that wants it.
Okay, thanks.
No worries. Are there any more questions? No. Well, I'd like to thank everybody for attending today. If you do have any further questions, like I said, please feel free to contact any of us. You have our emails, and we're open to any questions or having a one-on-one conversation or consult, anything that might help. So again, thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your day.